Awesome. Thank you all for joining. Office of the State Architects Energy and Environment Program presents on the Buy Clean Colorado Act for agency and institutions of higher education. Today's meeting will involve information regarding how to comply with the Buy Clean Colorado Act, and then at the end, we'll have time for questions. Therefore, let's get started. So let's start with some introductions, as some of you may not know all of the OSA staff on the call today. First, we have Tana Lane, who is our fearless state architect. Following her, our newest administrative assistant, Ellie Maji, is on the call. Next up, Rod Vanderwall, the well-known manager of OSA's Energy and Environment Program, is here. I will skip me briefly and hop to Heidi Alcantara. Heidi is OSA's Decarbonizing Building Materials Analyst. She is working to support the sales tax exemption portion of the Buy Clean Colorado Act. Finally, there is me, Bailey Vigil. I am the OSA's Buildings Greenhouse Gas Emissions Analyst, but more of you may know me as the Buy Clean Colorado Act Manager. I've been with the OSA for over 2 years now, and I've been working to implement the Buy Clean Colorado Act and all of its features. If you have any questions pertaining to the Buy Clean Colorado Act, please reach out to me directly, although any of these lovely people can help you navigate OSA's processes. Moving forward, let's discuss today's meeting agenda. Here's a visual representation of what we'll be speaking on. We'll start with some communications plus program updates. Then we will briefly highlight some important definitions to keep in mind. After that, we will go through the OSA's maximum acceptable global warming potential, or GWP, limits. Following that, we will discuss the Environmental Product Declaration, or EPD, process, as well as the Buy Clean Colorado Act waiver process. Then at the end, we will have time for questions. Okay, so the communication section. Due to the statutory authority of House Bill 21-1303 and the emergence and development of this requirement, OSA will be working with and educating the OSA delegate via communications on implementation of Buy Clean Colorado through the design and construction of projects. It is the delegate's responsibility to work with OSA to ensure compliance with this requirement through all phases of a construction project. This is to ensure that all waivers and modifications processed by OSA or the delegate are handled within the same criteria. Therefore, this statement is really meant to ensure that the law is followed and that you are working with OSA as we navigate this first year or so of implementation. Please keep us involved as we work through these processes over the next year or so. Next, let's get into a brief overview of the program. The Buy Clean Colorado Act applies to state public projects for which the project cost exceeds $500,000 and for which an agency of government issues a design solicitation on or after January 1st of 2024. I've linked the statutory definition for public projects here in case anyone wants to review that. But essentially, if you made the 6-month rule for your projects last year, then only projects being requested moving forward will be subject to the Buy Clean Colorado Act requirements. More specifically, if you solicited the design services prior to January 1st of this year, then your project is automatically exempted from these requirements. However, if you did not make the 6-month rule or you have an internally funded project that you are working to solicit now, then your project may need to meet these requirements this year. Feel free to reach out to me and we can talk through what this means for you. Today, I will be covering much of the information that is currently available on the Buy Clean Colorado Act webpage that is on the OSA website. Our webpage contains information regarding the Buy Clean Colorado Act policy, OSA's GWP limits, the Buy Clean Colorado Act forms, educational and training materials, important definitions and tools and resources. We have held a couple of previous trainings, and those recording meetings are available on the OSA website under that education and training materials section. So if you haven't reviewed the Buy Clean Colorado Act webpage yet this year, then I recommend taking a look at what's available as we've made a few updates. That link is included here. And as a final note for this slide, some of the benefits of complying with the Buy Clean Colorado Act include One, meeting sustainability goals and achieving national rankings that require EPD submissions, such as LEED, BREEAM, and Green Globes, as well as building with lower embodied carbon emissions. Next, let's discuss some of the notable policy updates that have been made to the Buy Clean Colorado Act. To start, principal representatives have the option to specify the eligible materials that will be used in the project and establish reasonable minimum usage thresholds below which the Buy Clean Colorado Act requirements shall not apply. Some of you have inquired about this, and yes, OSA is permitting each agency and institution to establish their own reasonable minimum usage thresholds below which the Buy Clean Colorado Act requirements shall not apply. More specifically, these thresholds correspond to material quantities. If you do not anticipate needing to use a high quantity of an eligible material for a project, then your agency or institution can establish these thresholds. For a little bit more information, the OSA policy permits agencies to establish reasonable minimum usage thresholds up to 50K. We want to see that the quantity thresholds that you establish represent materials in the 25K to 50K cost range, meaning the quantity thresholds for these materials need to contribute less than 10% of total material spending. We ask that you consider previous agency purchasing to establish these thresholds. If you choose to establish these thresholds, though, you cannot ask for waivers on these once you exceed the quantity limits. Further, each agency that creates thresholds needs to share them with OSA. We will be reviewing the various methodologies that went into creating these thresholds, and we want to be able to share these processes with other agencies and institutions as needed. As a final note here, each agency and institution is not required to create these thresholds, only in the case that you believe certain smaller quantities do not qualify to comply with the Buy Clean Colorado Act requirements. Please reach out to us with any questions you have regarding this. Moving forward, another notable update to the policy is OSA's permission to utilize linear interpolation for ready-mix concrete strengths with unspecified GWP limits. For example, 3,300 PSI strength concrete. I'll get into what this actually means here shortly, but I wanted you all to know that you are permitted to use linear interpolation for ready-mix concrete. And finally, the biggest update to the Buy Clean Colorado Act policy is the inclusion of exhibits which reference the OSA forms necessary for compliance. Once again, please reach out with any questions you have regarding these updates. So let's talk through some important definitions now, although I'm only going to mention a few of the ones listed in the slide deck. If you want more information, you can find all of these definitions on the Clean Colorado Act webpage, or materials means materials used in the construction of a public project, including asphalt and asphalt mixtures, cement and concrete mixtures, glass, post-tension steel, reinforcing steel, structural steel, and wood structural elements. In terms of eligible projects, one note that I'll make here is that the solicitation date of January 1st, 2024 refers to the date that each agency or institution has issued a design solicitation. If you have already solicited your design services prior to January 1st of this year, then you are automatically exempted from these requirements. Consultant, just wanted to provide some clarity that a consultant may be an architect or an engineer or any other occupation listed in this statutory definition. Global warming potential, or GWP, represents the embodied carbon intensity of materials. More specifically, the GWP describes the carbon impact that results from manufacturing materials. The GWP is a standardized way to measure the greenhouse gas emissions associated with a product from material extraction through end-of-life disposal. This is a very important metric for the Buy Clean Colorado Act program. Finally, Environmental Product Declaration, or EPD, or Type 3 EPD, means a third-party verified document that summarizes the life cycle assessment, or LCA, of a single product and publicly discloses its environmental impacts. EPDs enable comparisons between products serving the same function. For an EPD to be deemed approved, A, the EPD must be a current product specific type 3 EPD. The EPD must reference all ISO standards, which are included here. And C, the EPD must align with the applicable product category rule requirements. So that was our overview. Now let's get into some of the program specifics, such as OSA's global warming potential or GWP limits. To start this conversation, let's remember why we are all here today. OSA's maximum acceptable global warming potential limits went into effect on January 1st of 2024. Once again, this impacts projects that are greater than $500,000 that begin design solicitation on or after January 1st. Therefore, you are to utilize the GWP limits available at the point of design solicitation. If by chance in coming years we update the GWP limits while you are under construction, you will not need to update the limits that you are utilizing to match the updated version. Please see document EE 5.1 for OSA's GWP limits. This information is available on the Buy Clean Colorado Act webpage under the GWP limits section of the page. Moving forward, let's discuss OSA's update protocol. By statute, OSA is required to conduct our first review and update of the GWP limits by January 1st of 2026. This update may include additional product categories with established GWP limits, as well as revised GWP limits for our current material categories, all depending on where the industry stands and how it's progressed. However, OSA may choose to review the GWP limits and update these on an annual basis. In this case, the review process is set to occur during the months of January through February, with all changes complete by February 28th of the applicable year. With that, you all will be notified when we make any big updates. We will send out an email and likely host a brief meeting to discuss these, especially the big updates. Now a topic I'm sure many of you will want to hear. How on earth did the OSA establish these GWP limits? To start, we did a lot of research and outreach. We researched how California developed their Buy Clean policy, as they were the first in the nation to create such a policy, and we were the second. We also looked into how the federal government is approaching Buy Clean and how the industry recommends setting a policy of this nature. We researched each eligible material category defined in statute and any industry information available at the time. We met with the Rocky Mountain Institute, as well as started engaging with eligible material trade associations, such as the National Asphalt Pavement Association, AISC, AISI, the National Glass Association, and more. From these experiences, we were able to learn about some of the initial challenges that we would face, such as few EPDs, producer pushback, embodied carbon awareness, as well as manufacturing data and transparency. But these to hear about, as it gave us an idea of what we were up against. From there, we reviewed EPD databases to find industry-wide EPDs that align with our eligible material categories. We looked at multiple EPD databases, including trade-specific and industry-wide. However, we did choose to only look at EPDs being made out of NAFTA territory so that we could search for products within Buy American limitations. So we started gathering EPDs and verified along the way that all the EPDs that we were looking at had relevant and current product category rules, or PCRs. PCRs are important as they establish the rules necessary for creating an EPD for each specific material type. This information also helped us to establish our initial subcategories for the eligible material categories. From there, we were able to identify EPDs for various structural steel types, as well as differing wood categories. We chose to focus more on industry-wide EPDs at the time, as they were generally more readily available than product-specific EPDs, and they provide industry average impact metrics. So we were able to use these industry-wide EPDs to help us understand where each eligible material currently stands and what their metrics, such as the industry average GWP, looked like. Also, given that there were few product EPDs available at the time of initial EPD identification, we were able to determine a more accurate estimate of the average GWP by utilizing industry-wide EPDs. And this information helped us to determine our first round of draft thresholds, which were focused solely around the industry average values. From there, we conducted further outreach to the eligible material trade associations to ensure that the OSA identified eligible material subcategories were appropriate and correspond with readily available products with EPDs. We met with interested associations, made presentations, and requested feedback on program implementation from them. We then compiled the industry average GWP values for each identified eligible material subcategory. As mentioned, these served as our first round of GWP limits. We chose to then request feedback from clientele who will be using the GWP limits in their projects. This feedback determined that OSA should reevaluate the GWP limits and raise them to at least match our other peers who are setting similar thresholds, such as California and the General Services Administration. So given that some of the industry average GWP values had little U.S. market share contribution, as demonstrated through the EPD, that was believed to exclude 50% of available products. So the OSA had to do some creative thinking at this point and determine the approach moving forward. From there, we reviewed the GWP limits that our peers were setting, and these peers included the General Services Administration, Denver Green Code, Portland, Oregon, and California. We then reevaluated the EPDs that we used to set the initial values. From this information, we were able to determine what percent market share of North American manufacturers contributed towards the development of each industry-wide EPD. This information is reported in industry-wide EPDs as they track which producers contributed towards the LCA data. A greater percentage of market share indicates more U.S. manufacturers contributed data towards EPD development, meaning less products are excluded from the policy. From there, we reviewed the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator, or EC3 tool's conservative GWP value for each category. This conservative GWP considers all the EPDs within their database and only excludes the top 20% of emitters. So this was a good ceiling metric to consider, as it only excluded the highest 20% of GWP values. And it gave us a good value to compare our limits against. For this analysis, we also determined the number of product EPDs that were available on the EC3 tool at the time and noted the number of EPD producers using EC3. Knowing the number of product EPDs available was beneficial, as it provided information about how many products with EPDs are available for purchase by agencies. Further, knowing the number of EPD producers was a good thing because it gave us an idea about the number of producers that currently have reporting capabilities. Moving forward, OSA evaluated each industry-wide EPD's market share contribution and determined what percent market share yields a valid GWP average. We determined that at least 50% North American market share representation yields a valid industry average GWP, meaning at least 50% of North American manufacturers contributed towards the development of the industry-wide EPD. If the number of EPD producers on the EC3 tool supported the industry-wide EPD market share analysis, then the OSA identified industry average GWP values were considered acceptable. However, if EPDs demonstrated less than 50% North American market share, then OSA chose to reevaluate those specifically and add uncertainty to the limits. So, based on the percent market share contribution, OSA reviewed each eligible material subcategory and determined if a percentage of uncertainty needed to be added. Once again, if 50% or more U.S. market share was acknowledged, then the OSA identified industry average GWP value is used as a valid threshold. However, if less than 50% U.S. market share contributed towards the development of the industry-wide EPD, then OSA increased the GWP threshold to match the General Services Administration identified average GWP, which includes uncertainty. OSA also chose to adopt the GSA identified average GWP values for products that have no industry-wide EPD data currently available, but are important to include in the policy, such as asphalt mixtures and cement. So as a summary, the OSA set the updated GWP limits by conducting market share analyses coupled with available database information. OSA posted these revised draft GWP limits in June of last year. We solicited further feedback regarding these draft GWP limits. We met with the Colorado Department of Transportation to discuss how and where we can align our work. We also shared our GWP limits with our colleagues at the Rocky Mountain Institute, trade associations like NAPA, as well as the National Carbon Leadership Forum group. These stakeholders informed us of the feasibility in meeting these limits and supported us in utilizing uncertainty for some of the material categories. These conversations were valuable and helped us to get to where we are at now. So that is a summary of much of the work that has been happening behind the scenes over the last 2 years. The GWP limits are now in effect as of January 1st. So please reach out if you have any questions regarding this process or if you simply want to learn more. Moving forward, here are OSA's maximum acceptable GWP limits as of January 1st. This document that contains these limits is labeled EE 5.1, and this information can be found on the OSA Buy Clean Colorado Act webpage. An important consideration to keep in mind when looking at these limits are their functional units. For asphalt mixtures, this is the GWP limit per 1 metric ton of materials. However, for ready-mix concrete, these GWP limits are applicable per cubic meter of material. Please refer to the associated functional unit for each eligible material that you are reviewing. One other thing that I would like to point out are the strength categories for ready-mix concrete. The GWP limit that you'll want to meet for the ready-mix concrete category depends on what strength concrete your project has specified. Also, these concrete limits consider both the cement and aggregate necessary to create the mix. So you do not need to meet the cement and concrete limit if you are only utilizing ready-mix concrete. I'll touch on this a little bit more here shortly. In addition to those considerations, there are also some footnotes that correspond to each of the eligible material categories. I couldn't fit them on this slide, so I'll speak to them here and you can reference them on EE 5.1. So footnote 1 applies to the material column. This footnote states to only consider permanently installed materials, meaning if you are utilizing wooden framing that will not remain permanent within a project, then you do not need to submit EPDs for those materials. Footnote 2 corresponds to the column titled 2024 OSA Updated Limits. This footnote states that OSA subcategories align with available products, product categories, and building codes. Pretty straightforward. Moving forward, footnote 3 states that the asphalt and asphalt mixtures category is inclusive of all paving asphalt mixes supplied. Therefore, this is the limit for all asphalt mixtures at this time. Footnote 4 for cement and concrete mixtures states that these subcategories are based upon region 8 days, which is good information to keep in mind. Footnote 5 for glass states that designs specify processed glass and flat glass is a component of a processed glass assembly. There are currently few EPDs available for processed glass. Therefore, if you are looking for an EPD for these materials, you may need to speak with your glass or window fabricator to see if they can track down the EPD for the flat glass product that they utilize in the processed glass or window assembly. Please reach out if you have any questions or would like any help with glass. Footnote 6 states that there are 0 post-tension steel subcategories identified at this time. More specifically, this category may qualify for a waiver as we have not yet established a limit for this category of materials. Footnote 7 states rebar is the only identified subcategory for reinforced steel at this time, meaning no other reinforced steel products have GWP limits established yet. Footnote 8 states that the structural steel subcategories as defined by AISC, Code of Standard Practice, and HVAC units as manufactured do not need to conform. That's a key there. Finally, footnote 9 states that these subcategories are based upon available industry-wide EPDs only consider permanently installed wood products. This goes back to the wood framing idea. If the wood products are not being permanently installed on the site, then we do not need to see an EPD for those products. Please reach out if you have any questions regarding these limits or the footnotes mentioned today. All of that being said, there are some other material considerations to keep in mind. To start, the asphalt mixtures GWP limit was set a bit high, meaning the GWP limit includes a level of uncertainty and is therefore higher than the industry average value. Therefore, we are anticipating that you should be able to find mixes with EPDs and GWP values that are less than or equal to the GWP limit for this category. However, if this is not feasible, then we can discuss the waiver process. Onto glass. In addition to there being few EPDs available for processed glass and other specialized glazing products, there are also limited EPDs available for flat glass products. There are more flat glass EPDs available than processed glass EPDs, but there are still only so many, and tracking them can become a challenge. While EPDs may not be available for all glazing products now, we are anticipating that the industry will mature and the lack of EPDs will dissipate. Therefore, you may qualify for a waiver for this category for the time being, but you may not always qualify for a waiver for a product with few EPDs if more EPDs become produced. Reach out if you have any questions when dealing with glass. Post-tension steel, as mentioned, there is no GWP limit established for this category yet. Therefore, no EPDs are required to be submitted for this category. However, as more EPDs are developed and the industry gains traction in reporting, we will create a GWP limit for this category and EPDs will be required. We will provide updates as to when this will occur. However, it may be relieving for some of you to note that it's not required quite yet. Moving forward, cement versus concrete. I want to pause for a moment and just speak to the differences between cement and concrete. Cement is the binding agent for a concrete mixture. Cement almost acts like a glue. So in turn, concrete is a composite material made from cement, water, and aggregate. So cement is only a component of a concrete mixture. Therefore, only consider the cement limit if you purchase cement as is and use it. If you purchase a concrete mixture, please refer to the ready-mix concrete GWP limits per concrete desired strength. Please let me know if there are any questions on this. On this same topic, let's discuss how to use linear interpolation for evaluating concrete GWP limits between strength categories. This is for concrete strengths between the stated values. You are permitted to use linear interpolation to determine the appropriate embodied carbon limit rounded to the nearest whole number. For more information, linear interpolation is the process of estimating unknown values that fall between known values. The equation is listed here along with each variable and what they mean. So let's just talk through a brief example. Say that you want to determine the GWP limit for a 3,300 PSI ready-mix concrete mix. The strengths above and below 3,300 PSI are 3,000 PSI and 4,000 PSI. And these strengths correspond with GWP limits of 301 kilograms CO2 equivalent per meter cubed and 255 kilograms CO2 equivalent per meter cubed. So I took the difference between the GWP limits and the strength categories, 301 minus 255 over 4,000 minus 3,000. That yields 0.046. And then multiply that 0.046, which is the difference, divided by my desired strength minus my lower limit plus my lower strength GWP limit, which you can see here, follow along, and it equals 269, which means 269 is the maximum GWP per meter cubed for a 3,300 PSI mix. Once again, you only need to utilize linear interpolation if you are utilizing a ready-mix concrete mix with a desired strength between two values. So please reach out if you need any assistance with this or if you have any questions. Holy cow. Okay, we are making our way through these slides. The next process to speak on involves the Environmental Product Declaration or EPD process. There we go. So to provide an overview of the EPD process, I'll go through what is expected from the agency delegate, the design consultant, and the general contractor. This process should follow along with the project, but let's start with the agency delegate. Their main function for the EPD process is to pass along the forms to the proper channels, review and sign off on the consultant and contractor entries, and then submit Form EE 5.2 and all EPDs to the OSA during the project closeout. For the design consultant, they will receive document EE 5.2 from the agency delegate. The design consultant is expected to specify eligible materials with EPDs prior to bid and record those specifications and alternatives in Form EE 5.2. Design consultants are expected to complete the EPD design submittal section of EE 5.2 and submit it back to the agency delegate. From there, the agency delegate will review and sign off on the consultant specifications and then pass EE 5.2 onto the general contractor. General contractors are expected to consider the EPDs needed during the bid. One note that I'd like to make here is that each agency should consider adding a time delay to the delivery of EPDs from contractors specifically to the apparent winner of the EPD, a few months at best. EPD information may not be available at bid time, so this is one way to work with the contractor to give them enough time to collect those EPDs. From there, contractors are expected to procure and obtain products with compliant EPDs. These EPDs will be submitted to the agency delegate and then shared with OSA. Within EE 5.2, there are two spreadsheet tabs that the general contractor is expected to complete. First, the EPD construction submittal tab is to be filled out with product and EPD information for each eligible material procured and installed on the job site. Then the Transportation A4 spreadsheet tab is to be completed by the general contractor for product sourced over 100 miles from the project site. This information is not being used to being used within the GWP threshold at this time. Instead, we just want to start collecting information regarding products that are sourced greater than 100 miles. This will help us determine how we are sourcing various materials. And then finally, after completing these sections within EE 5.2, contractors are expected to submit EE 5.2 and a zip folder containing all of the EPDs obtained to the agency delegate. The agency delegate will then share EE 5.2 and the EPD zip folder with OSA during the L1 code compliance phase of the project. So given that many of us, including myself, understand things better when we can actually see them, I will now provide a brief demonstration of the EPD submittal and sign-off process. To start, we only want to see one spreadsheet per project. Please include all relevant information for the project within one form. The first tab of Form EE 5.2 is the instructions page. On each tab, we have information at the top of the form that we would like you to fill out. This information along the top includes the design submittal number, the name of the general contractor, name of consultant, the agency and institution name, the project number and title, and finally the corresponding date. Please ensure that this information is filled out on each tab before submitting the spreadsheet to OSA. And then there is an instructional block with more information that will help everyone remember who fills out which section. Moving to the right, we have OSA's GWP limits that correspond to each of the eligible material categories. Further, the yellow section on the far right contains a drop-down menu. In the instructions, we note that the consultant should fill out this section to indicate which of the eligible materials are applicable to the project, thereby making this an easy reference for all to see which eligible materials you are working with. Moving forward, the second tab of this spreadsheet is the EPD Design Submittal tab. This is a section that we would like the design consultants to complete. However, before entering any product information, please complete the section at the top that contains the project information. From there, the design consultant is to include information here for all eligible materials included in the project specifications, including eligible material alternatives. We want to see some of the product information as well as information from the product's EPD, such as the GWP. Upon selecting the eligible material subcategory here, the form will populate the relevant GWP limit off to the right. Then, once the specified EPD's GWP value is entered, a note will pop up whether or not the specified material complies with OSA's GWP limit, or if this category may need a waiver. This is meant to help consultants as they navigate the specification process. All entries are complete. The consultant needs to sign above and date the form. They will then share this form with the agency delegate who will review the entries and sign below the consultant. Once the design is complete, the agency delegate will pass Form EE 5.2 onto the general contractor. Please ensure that project information at the top of the tab is entered. The general contractor is then expected to enter information here for all eligible materials procured for construction of the project. This page acts very similar to the consultant page, as the GWP limit will pop up after selecting the eligible material subcategory, and a note will pop up whether or not the material complies with our GWP limit. The biggest change here is that we are asking contractors to list the name of the applicable EPD. We want to see the name here and a PDF version of the EPD submitted to us in a zip folder. We would like to have all applicable EPDs submitted to us so we can start to create a list of compliant products and EPDs. The contractor is expected to complete this form, sign off, collect and organize EPDs in a zip folder to share with the agency delegate. As another note, there is a column here titled Extracted, Manufactured, and Purchased Over 100 Miles. This column contains a drop-down menu. If the product has to be transported over 100 miles to reach the project site, then we want to see that information regarding the transport reported in another tab. So let's talk about that tab. The next tab is titled Transportation A4. This is where we want to see the transportation information entered for products sourced over 100 miles from the project site. The general contractor will be expected to complete this form since they are procuring the eligible materials. There is a section at the top for ready-mix concrete transports. Hopefully you aren't transporting your ready-mix concrete over 100 miles. However, if you are, then we want to see information regarding that transportation here. The information that is expected to be entered is the name of the material, the weight of the shipment, and the distance traveled. The number of trucks will automatically populate. You can also add information here regarding the original destination and the project destination, although that information will not be used in the calculation. Then the transportation impact will be computed off to the right for each material and summed up at the top for the total project. Additionally, there is a section below for all other materials. For this section, we do permit accounting for multiple trips if necessary. However, this information is quite similar to above. We want to see the name of the material, the weight of the shipment, and the distance. And the big change here is that we want to see the delivery mode that was chosen. These materials ship, rail, truck, or more. So there's a drop down there to select that mode of transportation. From there, we will just need, the distance traveled, and this will compute the estimation of transportation emissions created. If multiple trips are needed, then the emissions will add up accordingly. And as a note, for eligible materials procured over 100 miles from the project site, the distance or mileage is determined as a radius, like in LEED. Please reach out if you have any questions on this tab or if you'd like any assistance understanding it better. Finally, the last tab of importance for you is the final sign-off tab. We are expecting the project information be entered here once again. Then we want signatures from the consultant, the contractor, and the OSA delegate with the dates of completion. Please have consultants and contractors sign off here before collecting information from them and moving on to the next step. So that was a lot of information. Let's summarize who does what. To start, the agency delegate will obtain all necessary forms and pass information onto the proper channels, such as the consultants, contractors, and OSA. They are also expected to review and sign off to verify all entries within Form EE 5.2. The design consultant is expected to complete the EPD design submittal tab with all eligible material specifications. They are then expected to sign off on all necessary tabs. The general contractor is to collect and organize EPDs for all procured eligible materials. They are to complete the construction portion of EE 5.2, as well as the A4 reporting. They're also expected to sign off on all necessary forms after completing the entries. And finally, the big one, contractors are expected to submit EPDs in a zip folder and the EPD submittal form to the agency delegate for final review and sign off. Please reach out if you have any questions. Finally, given that there's a chance that some of you may experience some complications along the way, let's now go through the waiver process. To start, there are two types of waivers available for this program. The first type of waiver is a design phase waiver. This waiver comes into play when the design consultant recognizes that the contractor may not be able to obtain an eligible material that meets OSA requirements for a number of reasons. For these instances, the design consultant is to notify the agency delegate that a waiver process may be needed. From there, the agency delegate will notify the OSA and submit Form EE 5.30 with proper justification and reasoning. We'll get into what those justifications are here shortly, but it's good to know that there is a waiver process during the design phase of the project. With that being said, there's also a construction phase waiver process that can be initiated during the construction phase of a project. For these instances, the general contractor may notify the agency delegate that they cannot obtain an eligible material with a compliant GWP value for whichever of the reasons. The agency delegate can then approve for an alternative material with an EPD to be installed in place of the waived material. While this process does not need to be approved by OSA, we would like to see the information and justifications. And you can find OSA's Buy Clean Colorado Act waiver justifications on Form EE 5.31. When requesting a construction phase waiver, please verify with the design consultant that material alternatives are unavailable prior to requesting a waiver. If an alternative material is utilized, please submit the alternative product EPD to OSA in place of the specified EPD. However, if an alternative is not available, this is when you'll want to complete EE 5.30 as a construction phase waiver. Moving forward, we've also created a waiver management form. This form is meant to help each agency organize and maintain all waiver requests per project. Please add a new line item per waiver request and maintain this spreadsheet to be submitted with all waiver requests during the project closeout. Therefore, we are expecting you to submit all requested EE 5.30 forms and one EE 5.32 form with a list of line items for all requested waivers. This information is due from the agency delegate during the L1 code compliance phase of the project. The waiver exemption justifications are listed here. This information is contained in EE 5.31 and goes into more detail about what types of instances these justifications may apply to. As an example, if providing an EPD for an eligible material would be technically infeasible, then one will not be required or waived. This may be approved if the EPD is beyond its period of validity and cannot be renewed because the product category rule has expired and has not been renewed quite yet. As another example, in cases where an eligible material being utilized contains a percentage of reused or recycled material and does not have an EPD, then it may be approved under the justification of reused or recycled materials. And as a final note for this slide, we have added a new temporary justification, which is that there are no eligible materials utilized in a project. This is for instances where no or zero eligible materials are specified, procured, or installed for the project. This justification may go away in time, but we wanted to have a process in place for these instances. Please review document EE 5.31 and reach out if you have any questions. However, it wouldn't be a thorough discussion if I show you what the waiver form looks like. This is pretty straightforward. You'll verify that your instance truly qualifies for a waiver by reviewing the justifications listed in EE 5.31. If one of them applies, then you'll want to complete Form EE 5.30. This form will be for both design phase and construction phase waiver requests. We ask for agency and delegate information, the contractor and designer's information, the waiver request number, which we'll get into a little bit more here shortly, the project number and title, and then the waived product or material name. And then you'll notice we have a section to select whether this waiver is for the design phase or the construction phase of the project. This is just the first half of the form. So continuing on to the second half, we ask for the waiver reason. Listed here are the justifications outlined in EE 5.31. Select the applicable waiver exemption and provide justification below. Then we would want to see if there's an alternative product with an EPD that can be installed in place of the waived product. This will likely be a no if you've made it this far, but in the case that there is an alternative material, then with an EPD, then we want to see that material be installed. Finally, we ask for the delegate signature and the date of the request. Complete all these sections and submit this form to OSA for each requested eligible material waiver. Going back to the waiver request number, you can determine which waiver request you are on by utilizing Form EE 5.32. This is just a simple spreadsheet. We are not anticipating that you will need to request a full sheet of waivers. However, we ask that you keep one of these per project, as this will help manage the number of waivers requested per project. Please fill out one line per waiver request for each eligible material. Therefore, the first waiver that you request for a project will be waiver request 1. Then complete the subsequent columns with the date requested, the eligible material being waived, the product name, the waiver justification, and the OSA approval date once approved by us. Please submit this form with all requested waiver forms to us with the EPD submissions during the L1 code compliance phase of the project. So let's summarize what we've discussed about the waiver process. But to start, I want to remind everyone that the waiver process must involve the main point of contact, which is the OSA delegate. However, since we often use terms interchangeably, I wanted to highlight that the OSA delegate is the same person as the DPA authorized delegate and the State Buildings Program delegate. Nonetheless, during the design of a project, consultants may request the OSA delegate complete and submit a design phase waiver, which is Form EE 5.30. The design phase waivers must receive OSA approval. During construction, the general contractor shall notify the design consultant and OSA delegate that a waiver is needed. If possible, for then alternative eligible material with an EPD be installed in place of a waived material. However, during both the design and construction, if you believe that a waiver may be needed, please review EE 5.31, which lists the waiver exemption justifications. Utilize these justifications within your waiver request to maintain all waiver requests utilizing Form EE 5.32. The delegate is expected to also be the main point of contact throughout all waiver requests and to pass information along to the proper channels. During closeout, please submit all waiver requests, Form EE 5.30, and the complete waiver management form, EE 5.32, to OSA with the EPD submissions, EE 5.2, and the zip folder EPDs in PDF form. Whew, we have come a long ways in the past hour. Nonetheless, we've reached our time for questions. Please raise your hand, unmute yourself, or throw your questions in the chat. I am available to hang around and answer some questions if we go over time, but I'll take a look through the chat first. Awesome. First question posed, what was training number 1? We held agency institution training number 1 last year. You can find the recording of that training on the OSA by Clean Colorado Act webpage. Please reach out if you can't find it or if you have any additional questions. Next question. Is there a form for transportation emissions? Yes, the form for transportation emissions is included within EE 5.2 is the transportation A4 tab. I believe that is the fourth tab in the workbook. Please reach out if you have any questions on that. Next question, is OSA going to keep a central library of EPDs? Might benefit our A&E/GC community if they had such a resource. Definitely, we are working to make at least a list of our EPDs that we receive. We want to keep a list, if not maybe one day make it into a database of compliant EPDs so that it can be a reference for everyone as well. That's a goal of ours. But we need to receive your EPDs first to build that list. Next question, if a project waiver for no eligible materials during the design phase, does another have to be submitted during construction? No, if you're planning for the project and you see that you don't plan to utilize a single eligible material throughout the project, then please submit that waiver request to us during the design phase, and that will continue on through the construction. We'll be aware that you haven't added any eligible materials. Yes, so same policy for the Buy Clean Colorado Act. It was drafted prior to 2024 and it has now been implemented with all applicable changes. So yes, we are just now in effect. We spent 2 years ramping up to this point, but as of January 1st. What resources are available for consultants and contractors to learn this process? I will say that I'm working with various consultants as they're beginning to navigate these processes. However, I would like to host in the near future, or at least maybe make a pre-recorded training video directly for consultants and contractors. I understand that they may need some additional considerations, so we are looking at what information we can provide to them directly. Although you can always reference them to the Buy Clean Colorado Act webpage, and we have all of our previous trainings recordings there, and we will have today's recording there as well. And as that's just another plug, there are a number of EPD databases out there. Some are trade specific, such as Napa. They have an eco-label tool for different asphalt paving mixtures. Or there are also bigger databases that include multiple types of materials, such as the Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator, or EC3 tool. There's a link to that on our webpage, and it does require free registration, but it allows you to search for various EPDs of different materials, and you can select your regions or various thresholds. We are working to get a Buy Clean Colorado Act compliance filter on the EC3 tool soon as well. So eventually you'll be able to go on there, select your Buy Clean Colorado Act, and it should provide you with EPDs under our limit, but that is still a work in progress. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, whatever works. Yes, Mark Gutt.
Bailey, thanks for that presentation. I'm just trying to figure out how this all fits together in the bigger piece of the picture. So like say you have a large concrete structural job, and you go and figure out that your greenhouse gas potential GWE meets the requirement. So does that mean you can install any quantity of that concrete so long as your GWP is okay? Or and then if your GWP is not okay, do you just have to work with the vendor to try to change that mix?
Yeah, there are a couple of options. Ideally, you'll find a concrete mix that meets our GWP limit per the desired strength, and you can obtain that EPD that demonstrates these are the impact metrics, the GWP meets your limit, and then submit that to us with, of course, that reporting requirement in EE 5.2. However, in the chance that you're working with a concrete producer and the GWP limit exceeds our threshold, you can either work with them to maybe change up the mix for what still works within your design specifications. Of course, we don't want to reduce our specs just to meet this requirement. That's why if it poses a danger to those specifications, just feel free to request a waiver. And you can work with us through the waiver process if you want any help with that. And there is a waiver justification for technically infeasible or it doesn't meet the code requirements. So in those cases, there are options for requesting a waiver or just updating your mixture. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Bailey. I think I got that. I might call you though.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. Anybody else? As mentioned, it will take some time for all of us to get used to these requirements, but during our travels, we'll explain this further. At the OSA annual meeting, we'll have a talk about this, and you could always reach out if you have any questions or just want some more information. Any last ones? I'll stay on till noon then, and I thank you all for attending today's training. Oh yes, we got one. Okay, a number of our facilities are in remote locations. In those locations, a number of the local producers of things like concrete are small entities that are likely to be among the 20 to 50% of firms that don't publish EPDs. Since transportation emissions are not currently considered in our evaluation, it will give the contractor a perverse incentive to ship in materials from producers that do publish EPDs. This may simultaneously increase our carbon footprint and negatively impact small producers. And that is a good consideration. I think it's good to definitely weigh out the impacts of your various solutions. In meeting with some of the asphalt producers or asphalt trade companies, they made us understand how important transportation of paving materials really is and that it can increase your actual impact above the threshold. So that's one reason we are looking to collect that information, is to see how often we source that further away producer. However, we are working with people, making it clear that they need to be creating EPDs or figuring out how to create EPDs. So it's on people's radars, and contractors are looking at ways to find products within their resources and limitations. So I do think maybe upfront it could be an issue that smaller firms that you're utilizing may not have EPDs. And in those instances, we can always refer to the waiver process. However, I do think that it is on people's radar and that sooner than later, we will all have EPDs to utilize. An EPD is like a food label, but for our products. And I do see us moving towards a time where we actually are labeling our materials. I hope that helps, Matthew, but please let me know if you have further questions. Awesome. Anything else? We still have some people on the call. Well, you should have my email. If not, feel free to reach out to anyone at OSA and they can direct you my way. And yeah, reach out if you have any questions. Feel free to view this training at your own time. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks.